Good morning. It's great to be here. How was the first session for everybody? Good? Yeah, informative. I am, as Katrina said, I'm a graduate of Ithaca College in 1975. So it's a long time ago, and I'm one of the people that those people that graduated and stayed. I never left. I came from the metropolitan New York area. I did my 4 years at Ithaca College. I was in the business school, when the business school was not anything like the business school is today. I'm actually very fond of saying that when I graduated in 1975, I wasn't that impressed that I graduated from Ithaca College, and I am far more impressed today that I graduated from Ithaca College than I ever was back then. So it's really become a place that I'm so proud to be affiliated with, and I've had many opportunities to engage with students, being on the Business Advisory Council, the Athletic Advisory Council, and also the president of the Friends of Ithaca College. So I've done a very deep dive back into Ithaca College, and it means a great deal to me. But what I do when I'm not doing all that is I run a business called CSP Management, which I have run since 1990. And I manage about 700 apartment units here in town. It represents several thousand tenants. And also do besides the renting, we also do the maintenance. So I need to, before I start talking about whatever pearls of wisdom I have to offer you, can I just get a sense here of who is currently living off campus? So a lot of you, right? Right. And does anybody here live by themselves? Just one out of a large group. Who's had more than one rental experience? Who's rented more than one apartment in town? Yeah, a couple of you? Good. And give me an idea how you found that apartment. Anybody, just yell something out. Here in town, the apartment you're in town, how'd you find it? You just dropped down in here one day and you were living there, right? No. How did you find it? Was it off-campus housing to help you? Was it something online you found? What was the source you used to find that apartment? What's that?
We just use like a local housing, like PPM. So it's starting to move now. Yeah, it's starting to move.
So just hold on to these questions. I'm just trying to lay a little groundwork here. Who pays your own rent? Out of your pocket. You've earned the money to pay that. Okay. So not many of you. Most of you are helped by financial aid or your parents. Is that pretty much the drill there? Good. Okay. And this one's a little self-serving, but who's had a good landlord? Who's had a good experience with their landlord? Who's had a bad? Who feels like they've had a bad experience with their landlord? So, and some of you, the rest of you seem to be neutral. It's been okay. Okay. That's helpful to know, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I guess before I dive into anything contextual, I just by a show of hands, who here believes everything they find on the internet? Progress to that stage of intelligence where we know that the information that's out there needs to be looked at with a studied eye. The first thing I want to tell you that you need to know when you go to find a house, and an apartment, it's very expensive. Whether you are aware of what your parents pay or not, I'm going to tell you that on average, you will spend about a third of your annual income on housing. That is if you're doing well. Some people, I won't rent anybody if their income is more than 40, if the rent is more than 40% of their income, because then you are just putting yourselves in an unlivable situation. But know that on average, you will spend about 30% of what you make in a year on where you live. That's a big number. And so you want to make that decision intelligently. And if you are leaving here to go to someplace else, you've been fortunate enough to get a job somewhere else, or you're just deciding to pursue interests elsewhere, it's very expensive to move. The costs of moving alone, if you are bringing any amount of personal belongings, particularly furniture, the cost of a moving truck, and just even if you're not, just when you get to this destination and you begin to realize, oh gosh, I need sheets, or I need, I need to paint this place because I don't like the color. All of that is a very, very expensive proposition. So there are things that you can do to mitigate some of that stuff. But let me just to sign a lease, for example, you'll need, most places you're going to need 3 months worth of rent. First month's rent, I'm sure most of you did that for the lease you have now. First month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. So that's pretty standard. Some landlords will work with you on paying that out over a few months, but generally speaking, that's the metric that you look at when you actually find that apartment. So let's talk about finding that apartment. I think in Ithaca, when did you start to look for the apartment that you're living in? Did you look in the spring or the fall of the year that you were, for the year ahead? How many looked in the fall? How many were looking for an apartment in November? Okay, how about in December? Was anybody looking for an apartment in April? So, some, all right? It's really important. Ithaca has, the cycle here is driven by the school year. That's the renting cycle here. So many people come and go from here, and not just students, but just generally speaking, in May, June, July, and August, and mostly June, July, and August. Those are 3 critical moving months, and a lot of that is student driven, but it is just also naturally the best time to move because that's when the weather is best. No one wants to be moving, at lousy time, but mostly we are driven by the school cycle. That isn't always the case in other cities. So one of the very, very important things to find out if you are looking to move somewhere else is what is the renting cycle in that particular city? When is the right time to look? There are cities that have an abundance of apartments and people don't start. I know when my son moved to LA, he began to look for an apartment about a month and a half before he wanted to move. And there was an abundance of apartments to find because it's a large city. It has a huge population with lots of rentals, and it turns over routinely. Places that are more like college towns are often driven by the comings and goings of the school year. It is a really helpful tip to get out in front of that. I'm sure that those of you that began to look even in November here got closed out of apartments. There was probably felt an urgency to decide on something because there was a fair amount of activity in the late fall for finding apartments. That's not unusual. In the city of Ithaca, when you talk about regulations and things like that, we as property managers or landlords are not even allowed to ask tenants what their intention is for the next lease term, whether or not they want to stay in this apartment for 60 days after they move in. There's that cooling off period that we're not a lot, and, because historically speaking, and I've always marveled at this, by the way. People, students move in and then they just begin to look for next year. They're in a place for less than a month and begin to look at what the housing option is for the following year. The city actually got some pushback from parents of students about that, and so that cooling off law became something that is that's in place here in Ithaca. That's may or may not be the case in other cities. You may bump into certain regulatory kinds of things that drive what that housing market looks like, when you can rent an apartment. And so I think it's really important to get in tune with that, with the rhythm of that any particular area's rental cycle. So, you know, how do we do that? We all know we can't do this solely by looking online. It's not, it's certainly not well advised. So, what are ways you can think of that one might, if you were going to another place, how might you check out what are the good neighborhoods to live in? You're going to want to throw out a...
Word of mouth.
Say again?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth is good. What else? Any?
Personal experience. Personal experience.
First, if you know people there, right, but that's kind of word of mouth. Local periodicals, and we'll talk about neighborhoods often, right? The best thing you can do, the best thing you do is to go there yourself. You can do some advanced planning, but, and this is going to be an underlying theme to pretty much everything we talk about this morning, is experiencing it yourself. If you can be in that situation, walk around, think about it. This is a pretty important decision you're going to make. You're going to spend a third of your income. You're going to live there for a year, or you hope more. This is where you're going to make your life. It's worth the investment of time to go and spend some time walking around, getting in the car, driving around, seeing what neighborhoods look like, and get a sense of the you know, who lives in these, you know, different neighborhoods. Are they populated mostly by families? Are there enough young people around to make you feel like you fit in a senior citizen community? That is, and that takes a little bit of time to do that research, to spend and talk to people. You know, you can go into coffee shops and you know just ask people. You can just get a sense of the vibe and where people live. But talking to also another great way to get information is to actually reach out to a management company. I mean, we get inquiries all the time about what are the neighborhoods like, how do things break out. There are we put blogs up on our website about different events that are happening and different quality of life kind of issues. If you can latch onto that sort of a resource, you're going to make a much more informed decision about where you end up. Now, some of you may end up finding out that you're going to someplace and have a very small window of opportunity to make that decision. Maybe it's not practical for you to go spend 2-3 days walking around. A couple of things to think about that might help. Subletting is always an option for people to consider. You all know what I mean when I say subletting. Renting someone, stepping in to someone else's position on a lease. So that is something that both my son and daughters have done on a number of occasions because they've had to get somewhere, get into an internship quickly, had to find a place, and so they've taken on a 2 or 3 month obligation to live in a place with other people. I should talk about that for just a moment, and I think that this is a reality that probably will completely make sense to you. There was one person that raised their hand and said they lived by themselves, right? And there was most expensive way to live. It is far and away you are bearing the burden for all the rent, all the utilities, all the costs of living in that. And so, as many of you have indicated, you have roommates, and you found out that sharing that cost is helpful. That's no different anywhere you go. Living by yourself, while very attractive and desirable, comes at the highest cost of living that far and away. I mean, sometimes by a factor of almost double. So roommate sharing has popped up all over the place. There's any number of websites in any given community that have subletting or roommate sharing kinds of opportunities. The other thing to think about, and I'm going to come back around for that in a minute, but the other thing to think about is depending on if you actually have a job and depending on the company you are going to work for, they may have short-term housing. They may be able to put you someplace for a short period of time, and it doesn't hurt to inquire about that. It doesn't hurt to ask that question. I think it can be a real lifesaver stepping into a situation where you know you've got a month or two, get the lay of the land, get acclimated to your job, and then and then do this search rather than that more SWAT team approach where I'm here for 3 days and I got to find something and get home because I got my I got to get ready to come here. Finding things here. I want to spend actually. I want to leave time to answer questions. But certainly, if something pops in your head as I'm going along, raise your hand. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how to use that very powerful tool of the internet to find places, but then how you can make these but cautionary content. There's actually a cautionary tale I will tell you at the end of all of this when I'm finished talking about these little tips that was very real life, and it actually happened to me, and it drives a lot of the information that I'm telling you today. When you go to look for an apartment, I suggested a property manager before, right? I think they're a great resource. You may find individual landlords, again, given the size of the city you're going to and the population of that area. But by and large, you will be able to locate a property manager. A good property manager is going to ask quite a number of questions of you. They'll show you places. Then they're going to ask quite a few questions about you. Trashy, if there's, garbage outside or it doesn't look well maintained, that's a key to what you can probably expect from that landlord. That is that should tip you off if you go inside and things seem to be in disrepair. There's always some amount of, I guess I have to qualify that a little bit. There's housekeeping issues, right? All of us have probably had issues about dishes in the sink, or when you go into an apartment, there's maybe we haven't vacuumed in a few days or more. That's not the kind of stuff I'm talking about. But if you see things that are clearly broken, if lights aren't working, these should tell you, particularly if you're walking around in halls and there's that they're not clean and lights are out. It's a good indication that this place is not well taken care of. Asking other tenants, somebody has said that before, this word of mouth idea, this notion of talking to other tenants about their experience living in a particular building, if that's the case. If you're, that obviously only works if you're looking at a multi-unit situation, but that opportunity to talk to other tenants and ask them about their experiences is probably a pretty good idea to get a sense of how they've what their experience has been living in any given property. The kinds of things the landlord asks of you are a good indicator of, first of all, I won't delve too much into the legalities of what you can be asked, right? But you can be asked how much you earn. You can only be asked if you are over the age of 18. You can certainly be asked if you've rented before and to provide landlord references. And I would highly urge everyone to have all of that kind of information at the ready as you begin your search. So things like references, things like if you have a job, a letter that proves you have that job, these kinds of things that give someone who's considering renting to you a level of comfort that the rent is going to get paid, right? There's ways around that. If you don't have a job and you're still looking, we can talk about in a few minutes. But those kinds of things will, first of all, you should be asked for those things. You should be asked to fill out some sort of an application. These are indications that people are doing business, treating this as business and not just something that is fly by night. Okay, I don't want to throw a blanket statement over that. There are plenty of small landlords, even here in Ithaca, that don't do a lot of those things, that are terrific landlords. But the more professional that interaction is, both on both sides of it, the more prepared you are to have all that information at the ready, and the more that is asked of you is a good indicator that you're operating at a certain level of professionalism, and it's sometimes that's a gut thing. You just get a sense of the person, but really look for that kind of stuff. So now you've begun this search, you begin to see properties, you with a property management company, you found something online, whatever direction the search has taken you, and you begin to look at apartments. So you'll make an appointment, someone should meet you. don't ever let the person say, just go knock on the door, tell the person, I said you could come and see the apartment. That's really, in fact, I hope no one's ever had their landlord do that to them, is just have somebody knock on the door and go, hey, the guy that owns the place said I could come and see the place, said you'd be okay with it. Don't ever let somebody tell you to do that, especially in this day and age, but just as a matter of course. If anybody comes knocking on your door and says that, you don't need to let them in. But you're going to start to see a number of places. And they're all going to blend together. They're going to, if you think you'll remember, but you know, we all know the best way to remember what that place looks like is just to take pictures. Document it. You may spend, a day and look at 3 or 4 apartments and then get up the next morning and see 2 or 3 more and trying to make this decision. And I guarantee you, it will serve you well to take pictures of what you're seeing and note it, because when you go to actually make that decision, you're going to make a much more informed decision. And I can't underscore enough the importance of actually going to see those apartments. You can go to CSP Management today and find a virtual tour of many of our apartments. Not all of them, but many of them. We've had people look at those virtual tours and say, I want to take that apartment I saw. And we say, you can't. I'm not renting it to you solely on that virtual tour. Why do I do that? Anybody want to take a guess why I do that? I do it because I've had people show up. Because I only had to do it once, and have one person show up and go, hey, that's not what I saw online. That's not the apartment you showed me. And then you have a problem. It's just, you're going to live in this place. You're not going to live in it virtually. You're actually going to put yourself in this place. So if you're going to do that, go see the place. There's something about feeling a space, knowing whether or not it works for you, that it's very different than the imagery that you will see online. And if you can't do it yourself, if you can't put eyes on it yourself, find somebody you trust that lives in that area, by hook or by crook, to go look at it for you. There are so many reasons to make sure that what you see is really there, that the importance of doing that it's really paramount to anything else. Honestly, it is you're setting yourself up for either deception and/or disappointment if you do not physically see the space yourself, or have someone look at it for you and report back that it's real. And I'm going to tell you why in a few minutes. For a few minutes. Because in this day and age, when we are all guilty of clicking that I accept box in the bottom of whatever it is, that online banking form, that, for that form for phone service, that form for, whatever it is, we'll all click it without reading. Who reads that stuff? Nobody. Read your lease. Read the lease. Because unlike some other contracts, and make no mistake, the lease is a contract. Unlike some other contracts you'll sign where there's a cooling off period, 3-day grace to get out, that doesn't apply to leases. You can't get out of a lease once you sign it unless you either buy your way out or the landlord's against guy and lets you out. So be sure what you're signing. Don't sign anything online. You are entitled to understand everything that's going to be expected of you. And I'm going to tell you right now that the average lease, how many people have actually read your lease? Good, good. So what can you tell me about that lease? It probably feels like, wow, this is really weighted in the landlord's favor, right? Everything's, the landlord can do this, the landlord can do that, you can't do this, you can't do that, right? That's a standard lease. And that's okay, as long as it's not prohibiting you from living the way you want to live there. You know, there's lots of things that can go on leases. Most importantly, is how much you're paying and when you're paying, and what happens if you don't pay. Understanding that stuff is really, really important. It is. Find out when that.
Just as somebody who's never seen a lease, like what kind of things are usually in them?
So a standard lease, a good lease, will have the total amount you're paying, in what installments you're making that payment, typically monthly, but some of you maybe have experienced stuff where your parents have had to pony up a semester's worth of money. But whatever that schedule is in there, all right? The term of the lease, when it starts and when it ends. And typically there should not just dates, there should also be a time. Pay attention to that because that is, it has happened many times, and our leases end at noon on the last day of the lease. People think that they're in there until midnight. And we show up at noon, well, what are you doing there? What are you doing there? Well, I'm going to get out this afternoon. Well, you were supposed to get out at noon. Because they didn't read the lease. When can the landlord come in? Under what circumstances? And with what kind of notice? That'll be in a good lease, right? I'm going to lay this one on you. It's probably going to fall on deaf ears. I'm sorry if it does. But when that lease says you should have renter's insurance, which is protection for your personal property, there'll be a clause in most leases that say the landlord does not give you rights of storage. That make any sense to anybody what that means? That means if you bring your stuff in there, you do that at your own risk. The landlord is not protecting any of your personal belongings. If there's a theft or something else happens to your belongings, you're out of luck. Unless you have renter's insurance, or in some cases, parents' homeowners insurance will protect students while they're away at school. You don't know that if you're in the working world and you called your parents up and said, oh, my laptop came up missing, can the homeowner's insurance cover it? Probably not. But renter's insurance will. Renter's insurance will cover lots of silly things you don't even think about. Like I've had instances where the person has gone away, overflowed the toilet, or ran a washing machine. And one of those kind that you plug up, hook up to the sink. Left the hose on the floor, water ran out, got all over the ceiling downstairs, ceiling fell down. That's tenant negligence. That would be the tenant's responsibility. But if the tenant had renter's insurance covers that kind of stuff. So renter's insurance is an extra cost. It is. Probably costs you probably $200 to $300 a year. It's cheap. You probably cover about $50,000 of personal belongings and lots of things like damage. It's cheap, and it's in most leases that you'll see, and most people ignore it. Some people require that you get it. Actually, you may go to some cities where the landlord actually makes you provide proof of getting it. We don't do that. We don't do that. We strongly urge people, and we tell people the name of somebody they can go get it from at a pretty reasonable cost. But it is is something that you'll see in leases. Also things about noise restrictions, you know, what hours you can play loud music, you know, the good neighbor kind of stuff. I have no idea what any of you experienced when you moved into your current apartment, but if you were not asked to fill out a condition report that stated the condition of the place when you moved in, whether there was a little rip in the carpet, a little crack in the wall, our lease says that if you didn't turn that in, we gave you that sheet, if you didn't turn it in within 10 days, then we consider the place is in good condition without any problems. That's the baseline we use for security deposit refund. So if you're presented with that opportunity, which you should always be, to provide the baseline for what the place is like when you move in, and if not, then you should document it in some other way, either with photos and a letter to your landlord, particularly functional things. I mean, you should document everything. And we always tell everybody, write down everything. Everybody, if there's a scratch on the wall, write it down. Put it there, so, because if you don't put it there, then when we find it after you leave, then we're going to say you did it, even though it was there before you came. It's important to take the time to do these things because you're going to save yourself a lot of hassle. I often say that the landlord-tenant relationship is by nature adversarial. You know, no one, I tell people I'm a landlord, which puts me like maybe a notch or two above like terrorists and, lawyers. Shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. If there's good communication, that's really all I'm trying to talk to you about, is understanding the relationship that you're getting into, because it's important and it has implications if you do not do, right? If you don't perform, you don't pay, you get thrown out. If you're a tenant that makes a lot of noise and becomes an objectionable tenant, that's a violation of the lease. You can be asked to leave. And I think I'll leave it at that. I think, but those are the kinds of things that you're going to see in a typical lease. And if you don't understand the wording of something, like I just threw that out, rights of storage. No one knew what that meant, right? Ask. I guarantee the last line on any lease you sign says you've read everything and understand it. And when you sign it, it kind of means you read everything and you understood it. And so you should. We have about 6 or 7 minutes. I'm just going to tell you a quick story. Why does the intersection? My business is CSP Management. The URL for my business website is cspmanagement.com. Someone took my homepage of my website, attached it to a URL, csp-management.net, put it on a server, some other country, and began to do business as Jerry Dietz, a CSP Management. And began to attempt to, even though I only rent apartments here in Ithaca, began to rent apartments in New York, Boston, Chicago. Put the URL in the middle of a Craigslist posting. You clicked on it, went to a page, looks like a legitimate website, clicked on contact us, name came up with some other number, not mine. My name. And people were contacting this fictitious Jerry Dietz with, questions about the apartment I was renting in Chicago. How could they get that apartment? Saw the pictures. I said, no problem. Just wire money to this account. We'll We'll set up the keys, you can pick them up in such and such a place. If I tell you, it sounds silly, right? Who would do that? If I tell you 6 people did it, 6 people sent money over $20,000 worth of money changed hands that way. Wasn't a thing I can do about it. It wasn't my fault. It took me forever to get them to shut down that URL. It took forever. It's finally down. You can't, if you put that CSP-management.net in, it took 5 years. And I still, every once in a while, something pops up. Somebody calls the office and goes, you rent an apartment in Detroit, Chicago? That's why you go look. That's why you make somebody, that's why you make sure somebody sees it, that this place exists. Anybody can put pictures of it. Anybody can have a phone number. That's why. Because you think. And I just want to say, I wish I could say that these were people that were not educated or somehow, but these people were, mind you, renting apartments that were $2,000 and $3,000 apartments, or thought they were. And they didn't have the presence of mind to do the following. That should never happen.